we can start.
Thank you, dear journalists, for joining us remotely for this press conference following the European Council meeting. We are joined in Zagreb by Prime Minister Plenkovic, whom I hope is connected now. And I give the floor first to the Council President.
Good afternoon, everyone. We have today the occasion to have this video conference at the level of the European Council. And as you know, the main topic was the MFF and the Recovery Fund. It was the first occasion to discuss at the level of the leaders of the proposals put on the table by the Commission, the MFF and the Recovery Fund. It was the occasion to observe that on different points there is an emerging consensus, which is very positive, but at the same time we don't underestimate the difficulties. And on different topics we observe that it's necessary to continue to discuss. This video conference was important, was essential, because the first 3 weeks after the publication of the proposals of the Commission, we had the occasion to consult the Member States to make the clarity about the interpretation of those proposals. Now we shift to another phase. We will negotiate. And I welcome the readiness to engage. I'm totally committed to start immediately real negotiations with the Member States, and we intend to have a physical summit in around the middle of July in Brussels, and we will have the occasion to focus on some concrete proposals. Before this summit, I will put on the table some concrete proposals in order to try to take a decision. We are aware that it's essential to take a decision as soon as possible. We had also the occasion, Ursula and myself, to give a debrief after the high-level meeting that we had at the beginning of this week with Boris Johnson about Brexit. And as you know, during this meeting, we repeated the mandate that we have decided at the European level. We repeated that we are committed in order to reach an agreement, but not at any cost. We consider for example, the questions like the level playing field, like the governance, like also the protocol regarding Ireland and Northern Ireland are very essential topics in our opinion, and we took note that for the UK they don't have the intention to ask an extension of the transition period. It means that we need to intensify the negotiations. We trust Michel Barnier, and we will have the occasion to come back at the level of the European Council later on this important topic. We had also the occasion to have a debrief of Angela Merkel regarding the implementation of the Minsk agreements, and it means that now the Council can proceed with the rollover of the sanctions. And finally, I would like to congratulate Andrej Plenkovic. The rotating presidency by Croatia was not an easy task because of these exceptional circumstances that we faced together and that we are facing. And I would like to congratulate him for his leadership, for his creativity, for his flexibility. We had with Ursula, with Andrej, a perfect cooperation, and thank you for that. It's a great job. You played, dear Andrej, a very essential role in different topics, especially regarding this enlargement discussion and the possibility to find an agreement at the level of the European Council on this important strategic topic. Thank you for that, Andrej.
Thank you. Commission President, please take the floor.
Yes, thank you so much. And also from my part, many, many, many thanks to the Croatian presidency. These were challenging times. They have been outstanding in mastering an unprecedented task in these crisis times. So many thanks from my part too. It was wonderful to work together. And of course, we're looking forward to intensive work in the Council. But thanks very much for this presidency. Indeed, today's Council came at a crucial time. We are only now 6 months away from the end of the Brexit transition period, and it was therefore important to take stock of the ongoing negotiations with the United Kingdom. We jointly stressed our willingness to undertake all possible efforts to come to an agreement, seeking solutions that will allow us to sign a one-of-a-kind partnership with the United Kingdom. And indeed, for this we have to bridge wide divergences which remain to be solved. The topics are known. It's the level playing fields at the fisheries, the governance, and it's the scope of our police and judicial cooperation. These are important points for the European Union because these are principles: fair competition, the rising social standards, protecting our citizens and the rule of law. These are principles that are at the heart of the European Union. Time is short, however, and even if we find a deal, many things will still change in our relationship with the United Kingdom, for citizens, for businesses, for administrations. We therefore also need to plan for these changes. The Commission has been working on these issues. We've made progress, but we should not reduce our efforts. We will continue to assist national authorities and other stakeholders in their preparation for Brexit. I also emphasise to leaders that we must continue our work to ensure the proper implementation of the withdrawal agreement. We will remain very attentive on this point. Finally, no one can say with certainty where these negotiations will be at the end of this year, but I know for sure that we will have done everything to reach an agreement and to have a good start with the United Kingdom as a third country neighbour then. On Next Generation EU, just like we are 6 months away from the end of the transition period, we are now also 6 months away from the end of the current MFF and in the midst of the deepest economic crisis provoked by COVID-19. It is therefore essential that we lose no time in setting our economic and social recovery on a firm footing. And as you know, the Commission has come forward with a plan to do just that. It's called Next Generation EU, combined with a reinforced MFF. It will provide the necessary means, 1,850 billion euros, and the proper focus on a green, a digital and a resilient recovery to help the European Union, its citizens, its businesses to emerge stronger from the crisis. The first discussion was, in my view, very positive. Leaders unanimously agreed that the severity of this crisis justifies an ambitious common response, one that combines solidarity, investment and reforms. And I was also glad to hear that many leaders stress that we must do everything in our power to reach an agreement soon in the European Council before the summer break. There is real understanding that the effectiveness of the response depends on this too. Finally, there was a lot of support for the focus on the green and the digital dimension. That was very good. Those as driving elements for the modernization efforts financed by Next Generation EU. All this is good news. Of course, the discussions also showed differences of opinion on various issues. For example, the overall size of Next Generation EU, on the balance between grants and loans, on the allocation key, and on own new resources and rebates. It is absolutely legitimate to discuss all of these issues, and I explained to leaders the Commission's reasoning on each of them. So I look forward to the next steps in the discussions that Charles will organise in the coming weeks. I'm sure that on these points we can reach a consensus, provided we do not lose sight of the big picture.
Thank you, Madam President. Moving now to Zagreb for Prime Minister Plenkovic.
Thank you very much. Meeting to Ursula and Charles, and the final opportunity for me as the Prime Minister of a country that had the privilege to have the rotating presidency during the last 6 months, and to summarise briefly the few essential points which I today presented to the heads of state and government who took part at yet another video conference of the European Council in the course of the Croatian presidency. My general comment is that we really had an exceptional, extraordinary presidency due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has completely altered the methodology of the functioning of the Council. Unfortunately, as of first days of March, we had to stop with physical meetings at the political level in Brussels, in Luxembourg, and then even in Strasbourg for a while. Of course, we as Croatia are really unhappy that we couldn't host many of our friends and colleagues from the EU member states at more than 250 events, meetings, conferences that we planned to organise during this first half of 2020 in Croatia. However, our motto of the presidency was a strong Europe in the world of challenges. When I look back at the end of October, when we presented our programme, I have to admit none of us could have even imagined that we would be faced with such a challenge that Europe or the world hasn't seen for 100 years, both in terms of health issue, and that is the pandemic itself, and second, the unprecedented economic and financial consequences for the member states, for the European Union as a whole, but for the whole globe as well. Nonetheless, we tried to achieve as much as we could, and even though the situation was aggravated in Croatia by a 5.5 Richter earthquake that hit capital Zagreb on the 22nd of March, so we had two crises in parallel, and I'm happy that we heard a lot of solidarity from our fellow heads of state and government on the EU side in terms of helping us to address the damages that amount to 11.5 billion euros, and we look forward for the quick administration of our application for the European Union Solidarity Fund in that respect. What we did is that we took coordination in close collaboration with Charles, with Ursula, on COVID-19, with the integrated political crisis response already at the end of January, and then further on in a number of meetings that were organised literally in every single formation of the Council through a video conference. What I'm pleased that we managed to attain is the adoption of the Coronavirus Response Investment Initiative, as well as the SURE mechanism, which will both, together with the amended EU budget for 2020 and the activated general escape clause of the EU fiscal framework, enable the European Union to react quickly and extend a helping hand to the member states immediately. I think we made progress on the public procurement when it comes to the medical equipment. We were very pleased that we took care and jointly repatriated 650,000 citizens of the EU member states from across the globe in the midst of the crisis, that we completely managed to ensure the orderly Brexit in January, that we adopted a mandate for the new relations, and you just heard Ursula and Charles how the progress is currently ongoing. We hope to find a good framework for future relations with the United Kingdom. What I'm particularly personally pleased that we managed to put back on the agenda the dossier of the enlargement. We unblocked the very pessimistic situation of October 2019, and the Council passed the decision to open the accession negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania. We hosted, although in a video conference, the Zagreb summit, 20 years after the first summit, and I think the messages which were sent to the 6 Croatia's neighbouring countries with the Zagreb Declaration are encouraging for their future reforms and the EU-oriented efforts. We also organised, together with Charles, the Eastern Partnership Summit yesterday. This was another important message to those 6 countries with varying ambitions vis-à-vis the EU approach. We had a number of conclusions at the sectorial councils, external relations councils, but what I am really keen on attaining next week is the final agreement among the EU member states on the mandate for the conference on the future of Europe. I think now more than ever, we need to agree on the frame of this conference together with the European Parliament and the European Commission and make a quick kick-off event in order to debate the European project together with our citizens, because after such a crisis, I think that a thorough political debate is very much needed. What I would like to compliment is to Ursula for her courage and the leadership with the proposal that she put on the table a few weeks ago about the recovery plan. I think as much as every single government in our member states tried to step forward in the context of this crisis, vis-à-vis the private sector, vis-à-vis the businesses, vis-à-vis the workers in our countries, I think with this message of a recovery plan with 750 billion euros and the rightly devised balance between the grants and loans, that the Commission is really trying to extend a helping hand in the immediate years post-COVID-19 in order to allow the recovery of the European economies. Croatia is supportive of this proposal, and I'm encouraged by the tour de table which Charles organised today, and I look forward for reaching the agreement as soon as we can come to terms with all member states regarding the both multi-annual financial framework for the next 7 years and the recovery plan, which should enable us to work hard together next 4 years. Final point on Croatia. I'm very pleased that despite the fact that it was a tough year, we managed to fulfil all the criteria in our action plan for the exchange rate mechanism to accession, which is the antichambre for the Eurozone, and we look forward for the decision on our application in July. I thank very much Charles and Ursula for excellent cooperation throughout these 6 months, and my best wishes to Angela, who will take over on behalf of Germany as the next presidency as of 1st of July. Thank you very much and greetings from Zagreb.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister from Zagreb. First, a point on logistics. Can the technical team inside the House please make sure that the volume is raised sufficiently? We have a lot of participants. We won't be able to take all questions, but we'll start first with Susanna Freshes. Please, Susanna, could you give your question and clearly address to whom you want to state your question to?
Thank you. I was not expecting my question to be the first, because actually I would like to ask if the leaders also discussed the question regarding the internal borders, because we see some decisions, and recently, for instance, Denmark closed the doors to Portugal. Also, other countries did the same. So I would like to ask to the President of the European Commission if she sees the discrimination here, and when she expects this situation of closed borders to specific countries to come to an end, and also to the President of the European Council if this was discussed. Thank you.
So we have very clear guidelines on how to proceed till the end of the month. We expect the internal borders to be lifted. And there's a very clear pattern that has been set out, also brought to the Council of the Ministers who are responsible for the border management.
We had different meetings the last weeks in order to tackle this important topic, and indeed we encourage all the member states to cooperate in order to try to develop a more common approach. I am pleased to observe that we are lifting the restrictive measures, and I hope that it will be possible in the next days, in the next weeks, to continue to make more progress on that.
Thank you. Next question is for Lily Bayer. Please, could you switch on your cameras? It makes it a bit more comfortable for us. Lily, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, if you can hear me. Thank you very much. I have one question for each of the leaders. For Madam President, my question is, in order for your proposal to work, there's a need to raise the ceiling, the own resources ceiling, and that requires every national parliament to ratify. Are you confident that every national parliament will ratify this change by the end of the year? And for President Michel, my question is, could you give us more detail on when exactly you plan to hold the summit in July, and whether you think a second July summit will be needed? Thank you.
Madam President.
Okay, so indeed, as you said, the raising of the own resources ceiling requires unanimity in Council, the consent of the agreement of the European Parliament, and national ratification. And therefore it is so important to provide the leaders with good and sound arguments for the respective national parliaments to have the debates there. I think it is appropriate to have this kind of situation because it's a one-off. It is an extraordinary, unprecedented approach to this historic crisis, and therefore the full democratic legitimation from all levels is important for us. I'm convinced that in all member states, as we all suffer from this very severe economic crisis, and we know we are at the beginning and not at the end, the understanding how important, how urgent it is for each member state's own well-being economically and socially is there. What we want to prevent with this unprecedented package Next Generation EU is we want to prevent the unleveling of the playing field. We want to prevent the widening of the divergences between member states, which would be a weakening of the single market. So the opposite should be the aim of our action, and therefore it's in each member state's interest to have a strong single market, a strong European Union, because we all benefit from that.
I would add that this video conference was very useful in order to identify on which points we feel that we are working in the right direction. And for example, we agree that we need an exceptional response. We need that this crisis is unprecedented and that we need to focus on the sectors and regions which are more affected by the crisis. Another important point is the fact that the proposal made by the Commission, this idea that we need to borrow at the level of the Commission and to increase the ceilings of own resources is also a positive approach. But it was also the occasion today to observe that on some topics it remains very complex and very difficult. It means that in the next days, in preparation of the next physical summit, we will need to work very actively on different difficult topics, like the size, the amount for the MFF and for the recovery fund, the rebates related to the MFF, the question grants versus loans, the conditionality is also a difficult topic, it's not a surprise, or another difficult question is related to the criteria and the importance for some member states or for many member states to consider that the criteria should be more linked to the consequences of the COVID-19. We will work very hard. We will try to accelerate the negotiations in order to have an efficient and useful meeting in July.
Thank you, Mr. President. Going to Marco Bresolin now from La Stampa. Marco, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. It's just a follow-up on what President Michel just said. You said that you will put on the table a concrete proposal in the coming weeks. Could you elaborate a bit more on which point will insist your proposal? I mean, for some member states, the total size of the recovery fund is 750 billions and 500 billions of grants are untouchables. Do you think that these figures are untouchable, or there are some room for maneuver to change the total amount and also the level of grants? Thank you.
It's not my intention to negotiate through the press, but of course I've explained what are the difficult topics, and it means if we are current that we need to tackle the difficult topics and to be innovative, to be creative in order to be able to support with 27 member states a common approach to take a common decision. It will be difficult, it will be complex, and I don't underestimate the task, but I felt today a common strong political will to engage, which is very positive.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll take one more question from Sam Fleming from the Financial Times. Sam.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Could I go back to the allocation key, which you mentioned, President Michel, and ask both presidents whether you see scope for a compromise on the allocation key, because, as you said, there are some member states which are quite concerned that the allocation key really isn't related to the crisis itself. It's using economic indicators which predate the crisis by several years, in some cases on the unemployment one. Is there a way the Commission can rework these allocation criteria to make them more relevant to the crisis without alienating at least some of the member states in doing so? Thank you.
Yes, it's right. It's one of the difficult topics, and you are right. For some member states, it's important to have a clearer link between the data that we will use related to the recovery fund and the distribution of money through the recovery fund and the consequences of the COVID-19. And it's certainly one of the points that we need to tackle in the next days and weeks.
So, indeed, what the allocation key is concerned, there have been discussions like on other topics. I think here is important the way we approach it. First of all, we've done other simulations, for example, with the spring economic forecast, and you see there is no significant change in the allocation of the means. So this shows that it is very plausible. What is it composed of? There are many variables in that are strictly linked to crisis phenomena, but the variable in question is often why are you relating to the last 5 years of unemployment rates? And if you look at the effects of the crisis, you see that the negative effect, the damaging effect, was of course prominent in member states that were not resilient enough in their overall structure to absorb the shock of the crisis. And therefore, rightly so, in the discussion with the leaders, there was a strong demand to take the funds of Next Generation EU not only to address the crisis, acute crisis elements like in the health sector, for example, but to address through investment with reforms the deeper lying sources of the lack of resilience in member states who then had a worse outcome from the crisis. And if you link these two things, the variables of the crisis itself, the health effect, but also the vulnerability of economies being exposed to the shock and the inability to absorb this shock, this is very well represented in the unemployment rate over the last years. And therefore, we have this combination. I think it's worth to go in detail in explanations with the member states on that again, so that there's transparency and understanding why the things are as I just described. This is one of the important topics to discuss.
Thank you, Madam President. This concludes our press conference for today. Good afternoon to you all, and see you soon.